back. I'm way over time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Inspector General Lennox, did you desire to interview Secretary Clinton as part of your investigation?
Yes, we did.
And were you able to do so?
No, we were not.
And how was it communicated to you that you were not going to be able to do so?
Through her counsel, David Kendall had sent a letter to one of the team leaders on the report.
Is that letter available for Congress to inspect?
You know, I'll go back and check, but I'll have to get back to you on that. I mean, it certainly exists. Whether if it's legal to provide it to you, sure.
Well, let's do this then. Let's fast forward and let's assume that you were able to interview her. Why did you seek to interview her, and what questions specifically would you have asked?
Well, the focus of our report was not about classified information. The focus of our report was how the department, over the past 20 years, addressed records preservation and cybersecurity. You know, we were looking at whether or not there was a rule the department issued in 2005 requiring that employees use departmental systems. She used a non-departmental system, her server, to conduct official government business, and we wanted to ask her questions about that, whether she had approval, who approved it, and so forth. We also, so we want to get her perspective on those issues, among others.
So let me see if I have this right. The Inspector General for the State Department wanted to interview a former Secretary of State.
That's correct.
And that request was declined.
Yes.
Well, at first blush, it sounds like your question was a reasonable one. You want to make sure that the information is safeguarded and protected and archived consistent with law. So I wonder why you weren't able to interview her. You given a reason?
Just the reason that I articulated before. Other than that, I would be speculating.
What other questions, and if you need to ask any of the wonderful folks with you, what other questions would you have sought to ask the former Secretary of State?
Well, we also looked at records preservation, and the rules required certain that she print and file her emails, and that she, you know, make sure that they're part of the agency record-keeping system. We would have asked her about that. We would have asked her about some of the attempts to hack her system, at least as expressed by her some of her staff, which we've identified in our report. We probably would have asked her about that. So those are the kinds of things, her state of mind and so forth.
I don't think you were in the room for Director Comey's testimony, and I don't know whether or not you had access to it in the back. Are you familiar with his testimony that convenience was one of the intentions the former secretary had in having this unusual email arrangement with herself?
No, I don't recall that, but I did watch parts of the testimony.
All right. He did cite convenience as one of the factors. Do you know when her emails were returned to the State Department?
They were returned 21 months after she left the department.
What was going on the second month after she left that made it inconvenient to return them then?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
How about the fourth month?
Again, I just don't know.
How about the one-year anniversary?
Same answer.
Do you know what possibly could have inspired her to begin searching for those records?
Well, she did receive a request from the department to return records in accordance with their obligations under the Federal Records Act and NARA regulations.
But that obligation didn't manifest itself 21 months later. That obligation was present the day she left office.
And one of our findings was, along with Secretary Powell, that both of them failed to surrender their records, their personal records containing government business, when they left the department, thus depriving the department of having those records as part of the agency record-keeping system.
And I assume you probably would have asked the former secretary, had you had an opportunity to do so, why it took 21 months to return public record. And just so there's no, I mean, nobody likes Congress. I get that. We're not sympathetic. But there are FOIA requests that would have been received by the State Department during that time period, right?
Possibly.
How would those FOIA requests have been responded to and complied with if they didn't even have the records?
Well, as we identified in our previous report on FOIA, it would have been difficult if the records are not part of the agency record-keeping system to respond to FOIA.
I'm out of time, but I know the chairman will give me one more question since he's given a lot more than one more question to other folks. I want you to assume an absurd hypothetical that Secretary of State has exclusive use of personal email and that she is corresponding with someone who also uses personal email. You with me?
I'm with you.
How in the world is the State Department ever going to capture that email?
It would be, and this is something we addressed in our FOIA report, it would be difficult because...
That'd be a challenge, wouldn't it?
It would, because only records under the agency's control are subject to FOIA. So in other words, the department wouldn't be able to reach in necessarily to a private account. So
Well, you wouldn't even know about it, would you? If it's personal to personal, how would you know about it?
You wouldn't know about it.
All right, well, I'm barely out of time. Thank the chairman.